Good evening. I'm Robin Garrell, the president of the Graduate Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you to an important new series of public programs. This is my first public program as president, and it's wonderful that so many of you could join us tonight. Our public programs are a fundamental part of what we do at the Graduate Center. We are proud of our position as the public graduate school in New York City and proud to be a place for conversations about ideas and issues that are vital to New Yorkers. Tonight, we kick off our Change series. In a year unlike any other, change is the core of our national conversation as we seek to create a more just and democratic society. Throughout this series, we will look at critical issues facing us today, engaging leading theorists and activists. I want to acknowledge the Center for the Study of Women and Society, the co-sponsor of tonight's program. More than 30 research centers and institutes are at the Graduate Center, and they and our renowned faculty and stellar students are at the forefront in studying the most challenging and complex problems, identifying solutions, and developing paths for change. Professor Ruth Gilmore is among the most insistent and original voices today. She's a leader of the movement to abolish prisons and has transformed the study of criminal justice. She is a professor of geography in the doctoral program in Earth and Environmental Sciences and associate director of the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics. Author of the award-winning book, Golden Gulag, Prison Surplus, Crisis, and Opposition in Globalizing California, Gilmore's forthcoming book is Change Everything, Racial Capitalism and the Case for Abolition. She is the recipient of many awards for her scholarship and activism and was honored by the American Studies Association with its Angela Y. Davis Award for pursuing scholarship for the public good. Tonight, she will tell us about her vision for a society that builds communities and ends mass incarceration. Speaking with her tonight is Mariame Kaba, an organizer and activist dedicated to transformative justice. She is the founder and director of Project NIA, a grassroots organization focused on ending youth incarceration. Please join me in welcoming Mariame Kaba and Professor Ruth Gilmore.
I think we're here. Mariame?
I'm here. Hello.
Hi. Hello. Hello. Hundreds of people who have joined us this evening. And thank you, President Garrett, for that kind introduction. I'm sorry that my biography that's online is 6 years out of date. I'm the director of the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics. And there are other things I could say about myself, but I did want to set that straight. And I'm delighted to be here this evening talking about these vital issues with my friend and colleague and mentor and comrade and sister, Mariame Kaba. Mariame?
Hi, Ruthie. I'm so happy to be here today. I want to thank the Graduate Center for the invitation to be in conversation with you. You're one of my favorite people, teachers, touchstones, and I'm mostly going to be kind of asking you a bunch of questions like I always do. So I'm excited that we'll keep having that as our conversation. I do want to make a point for taking some accountability here around access and accessibility. We don't have an ASL interpreter and we don't have option for live captioning. And that's really, from my end, I didn't ask in advance, I just assumed, and that was on me. So I want to apologize to the folks who cannot connect with this conversation today because of it. Access is really important, and we really have to make our spaces accessible to everyone. So my understanding is that there's going to be captioning post the event on the video, but that's certainly not good enough. So I wanted to start there and make sure that, again, I took accountability for the fact that I didn't ask in advance and should have. So let's get into it. So I want to have our nice slides up, please, Jim, and we're gonna get started, or John will do it. Please go to the next slide. So I'm excited always to be in conversation with Ruthie, and I'm particularly excited because the Gilmore Girls is one of my favorite shows of all time. And I was so excited back in early June when on Twitter, there was an account called the Ruth Wilson Gilmore Girls account, which now has 20,000 followers and is really kind of bringing a lot of Ruthie's work to a new audience of people, which makes me endlessly delighted and happy. So I wanted to talk about kind of some of the themes that I hope we're going to be able to get to today. So we're going to do that through using some of the memes that have been created through this account. And that's what I will do. So next slide, please. So as a kind of kicking off point, we're going to talk about abolition as a theory of change, as a theory of social life, and as about making things. And all of these are quotes from Ruthie and Ruthie's work over time. Our next slide, please. We'll definitely touch on the fact that what we know about mass incarceration is that it is class war. Next slide, please. We'll definitely talk about prison abolition as a specific form of anti-capitalism. Next slide. We'll touch on the state and its various configurations. And I like this from Ruthie's work. The state does not think and do. People in various configurations of power, including from below, enliven states to think and do. Again, a great thing to be thinking about as we're thinking about the uprising and the resistance of the current moment and the fact that we have agency. Next slide. How to fight has everything to do with figuring out what do people who are already organized do? Is it possible for what they're already doing to be connected to this radical vision of a future for all of us? So we'll talk about organizing tonight. Next. That's it. You can pull off the slides, John, for now, and we'll come back to them in a minute. So I wanted to give you a preview through Ruth Wilson Gilmore Girls of what we're going to be touching on in various configurations today. So we're going to start off with the most pressing question of the current historical moment, which is how many episodes of the Gilmore Girls have you watched? Because the people need to know.
Do the people really need to know?
The people really need to know.
None.
Oh my God!
I've never seen that show. And I am tempted next time I am sick in bed with a temperature that I know is not COVID-19
Yes.
to perhaps start binge watching it. But I've never seen it. It's all just an idea to me.
It's all just an abstraction for now.
Yes.
All right. Well, we'll
like abolition for a lot of people.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, let's get into it. I would love to just start off by asking you what's on your mind right now. As we are thinking about the current historical moment with our pandemic worldwide, economic violences of all sorts, uprisings all over the place. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking everything. I'm thinking about how COVID-19 showed us how the entire planet is knit together. And it's not knit together into something that throughout different societies and places and territories and political economies and systems of power and difference is the same, but everybody is looking at this pandemic, and that riveted gaze that we all have to put on it makes it possible and necessary for us to look at all of the other ways that the world is knit together, and again, what divides us. So it's kind of obvious that in the United States, COVID changed everything. But that doesn't mean that COVID produced the devastation out of whole cloth that people experience now. Rather, it made people able to see the kind of precarious life that so many, 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 many millions and millions and millions and millions of people in the United States, whatever their citizenship, live. And then by extension, COVID let us see, actually compelled us to see, how that kind of precarious existence, and I include people who are listening tonight who live from paycheck to paycheck, who might not be unhoused, might not face being unhoused, but still are not altogether sure how to keep life together. That connection between and among the people of the United States, whether they have jobs or not, and the people of Brazil, whether they have jobs and land or not, and the people of South Africa, the people in Europe, the people throughout Asia, indeed, people around the world, compels us to stop and think, why is the experience of a virus that is in theory deadly to any human so differently deadly, not only between and among groups of humans in particular societies, but so different between and among societies completely. There are countries that are relatively poor, where deaths from COVID are low, because public health is designed to keep people well. There are countries like the United States, which are rich, where deaths are very high, because the public health system is no longer designed, if it ever was, to keep people alive. So in thinking about all of this, I think, well, what should the state be? What should it do? Now, some people who are listening tonight would say there should be no state. Yep. We should smash the state and take care of each other based in our capacity to mutually aid and support and work with and feed and house and clothe one another. That is a perspective. It's not one that I share. I work at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, which is an institution of the state, and I think it's a great one. It is a working people's university that serves 500,000 students, and my dream for it is it would be bigger and stronger and have more students and provide the kinds of experiences in classrooms, not only to prepare people for jobs, but to enable people to live wonderful lives. That's what the City University of New York should be. The pandemic has devastated the city of New York, as everybody knows. Dozens of our colleagues and coworkers at CUNY have passed away. Thousands of our coworkers at CUNY have been laid off. And this situation should not be possible. The fact that $1 of revenue can be generated out of thin air through the practice of what we call printing money or issuing debt means that $10 trillion can be generated out of thin air in order to put people to work or provide people with income subsidies or provide students with stipends so they can study instead of have 3 jobs cobbling together a meager living, so that we can live a better life in the United States and in the world. So those are the things I'm thinking about. And I take a lot of encouragement from many of our friends and colleagues and relatives throughout the world, including our relatives who are First Nation, Native Americans in North America on unceded territory, who live in and near reservations, or again, in not designated reservations, but unceded territory, who on the one hand suffer greatly because of the ravages of COVID, but on the other hand, give us many insights into how we should be stewards of the land and of the environment in order to live more fruitfully and flourish on this planet. So that's what's on my mind tonight.
One of the things I've been thinking a lot about is, the fact that we know austerity is coming in an even more drastic way than it already exists. And I'm thinking a lot about something that you talk about often, which is like, as abolitionists, we're not about trying to save money. Like, that's not the point. Actually, we want to spend a lot more money, and we want to spend it in just different ways. This ties in a lot to me to the conversation around defunding that's really taken off over the last, few months from the summer on. And, as more austerity is coming, we know that policing is going to be, or is, essential to enforcing that austerity. So the connection between the economics of the moment and the kind of finance system of the moment and what we're talking about in terms of the systems of death-making institutions around the PIC intersect all the time. But I think we're about to see a fulcrum in ways that are even more important, which for me means that it feels even more important to be having this conversation around defunding as connected to abolition. You often say that abolition is not a blueprint, and I'm hoping you might kind of talk about what I'm, the things I'm throwing out there that are on my mind right now, and connect that to this concept of abolition as not a blueprint, but as a thing we began with, which is a theory of society and a theory of making things and a vision and a politic. So I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yes, that's a very good question. Many people ask me, and I know they ask you and they ask others, but what are you going to do instead? Yeah. Because in their minds, they think that abolition is something like alternative punishment, rather than changing the conditions under which police and prisons become so central to society in the first place. And changing those conditions, it's really a lot of common sense, but common sense doesn't change anything unless people band themselves together and create the power, which is to say, express collectively the political will for things to be different. And political will takes a number of forms. That's another reason abolition is not a blueprint. So for example, there are many people who these days are rather fixated in the US on electoral politics. Mm-hmm. Electoral politics are unlikely to be the mode through which people relieve themselves of the constant, repetitive crises that come with capitalism, saving capitalism from capitalism, which is what austerity is. Mm. The New Deal was also capitalism, saving capitalism from capitalism. The high tax, high social welfare programs and excellent education and healthcare that characterize a number of countries, high income, middle income, and others around the world are examples of capitalism, saving capitalism from capitalism. Mm. So if we think about the electoral sphere, rather than imagine that choosing the right individual or pair of individuals to be the bosses of the state, rather to think about the entire array of decisions that people who are entitled to vote, which is not everyone who is a resident in the United States, the entire array of decisions that people make when they approach the ballot booth or fill out their mail-in ballot in November. So not only are there the highly contested positions at the top of the ballot, but there are all kinds of other aspects of political life through which people can organize their political will to do things like make determinations about who should serve on school boards. Who should serve on school boards would then determine, for example, whether schools should use scarce resources to continue to employ school resource officers, which is to say police in school, or use those resources to have smaller class size, more interactions between students and others who can guide them, and more of the kinds of activities that you and I enjoyed as young students in elementary and secondary school. Art, music, sports, all of those things that get squeezed and turn into dust and disappear under austerity. Class size should be small. Now, what does all of this have to do with defunding the police? It has everything to do with thinking about how public budgets, which is to say the allocation of resources gathered from the public for the public, that's what the budget is. What that public budget tells us about the priorities of a society. And a budget that has as its principal purpose to provide protections from calamity and opportunities for advancement is quite a different budget than one that focuses on using the powers of organized violence to contain and direct the effects of organized abandonment, which is what austerity is. There are so many people in prison today in the wake of round after round after round after round after round of organized abandonment in the United States. And organized abandonment, the removal of jobs, factories, benefits, schools, you name it, throughout the United States, different in different places, but it sums up to a general burden that households and communities bear. And the displacement of all of that vulnerability to criminalization and social control and prison is something that I lay out in great detail in my book.
Yep.
The fact that the US never developed any kind of extensive and intensive and reliable welfare state, and I don't mean aid to families with dependent children. I mean a state that looks after its people as a matter of right for the people to have it to lean on.
Yes, this leads me into, kind of like seamlessly into the question of organizing. You're a longtime organizer, and I've been thinking a lot about organizing, questions about organizing in general in this moment. The limits that we have right now of the kind of organizing that we often think about on the left as the kind of, community-based, hyper-local forms of organizing versus kind of a distributed model of mass movement building in order to be able to actually build enough power to both act against the state and outside it to the extent that you ever can, which, there's an argument about that, fine. But like that we are in this moment where we need to find the mode of organizing which has current actual purchase in this current circumstance of our time. How are we going to create this collectivity towards survival? How are we going to make these things as you're talking about? I'm wondering if you might share with us from your experiences, your both, you know, the organizing experiences, but also your reading and thinking, 3 lessons that you might impart that would help us to think through this concept of the hyperlocal community and the mass distributed social movements that we're going to need, really, if we're going to be able to win. Where are you on this right now? How are you thinking?
That's a great question, Mariame, and I'm glad you asked it. I think we have to follow the teaching of Malcolm X, and that is we have to do things by any means necessary. Now, some of you might imagine that picture of Malcolm X standing at the window with a rifle. I don't have a rifle, and I'm not going to stand at the window with anybody's rifle, but I am going to use all of the means that are available to us to get organized. The first lesson I learned many years ago, many years ago, was to organize with people who are already organized. There are large-scale public and not public trade unions. Organize with trade unions. Now, some people might say, oh, but you know, the police have a union. Yes, they do. It might surprise any police or police households who are listening tonight to learn that I am not against any person's income, and saying defund the police does not mean, for me, take away the means to pay for life and have a living for people who are employed as police officers. That's absurd. That is not. I mean, how do you build a social welfare state if you just make a whole lot of people unemployed? How about you keep your income and do other things with your time? This is something I said to prison guards in many different struggles over trying to shrink prison systems. And it particularly resonates in working class households because police, like prison guards, are very often the kinds of well-paid and well-pensioned working class jobs that people with modest educations can get. I'm all for people with modest educations getting jobs. I teach PhD students. I hardly think everybody should have to have a PhD or even a BA to have a job that is fulfilling and interesting and exciting. So organize with already organized people. I've done it with teachers, with nurses, with the United Farm Workers, with home health care workers, with faith communities, with people who formed those kind of small mutual aid societies that you were describing, Mariame, in order to fight one thing. Yeah. For example, there was a network of very small dispersed organizations that grew up in Oregon some decades ago in households that were fighting against a proposed law that would define marriage as between a assigned at birth man and a assigned at birth woman. Those people who organized for that purpose remained in touch. And many years later, when a group of us were trying to figure out how to build a campaign against prison expansion in Oregon, we reached out to the organizers who had had a completely different, but in some ways not unrelated, agenda for why they organized. They immediately, in many places, activated themselves and became part of the infrastructure of the anti-prison work. Mm-hmm. Organized with people who are already organized. And then the flip side of that is, if there aren't people already organized, but a lot of people express a lot of energetic enthusiasm or concern or care about a particular issue, then organize them into a group. So I am known for being co-founder of many organizations. Why? Not because I take that much joy in sitting down and working out the bylaws and what the process is and will we be consensus or majority or all of that. I kind of hate all of that. But what I love, do you love it, Mariame?
No, I don't. You know I don't. That's the question.
But what I love is that people come together mindfully and meaningfully to create something because they have the energy and the desire and the fear and the belief that they can do it.
Yep.
So create organizations. So that's the first big lesson, and I've used almost my entire 15 minutes to talk about it. So let me say two other things that are related. The second of the three lessons is for us always to remember that there are so many things, so many issues and concerns and understandings and perceptions that are not complete yet. We have lots of sort of potential feelings about what could be, but we haven't really been able to explain it yet. And this is where art is central to the work we do. And I'm looking at this beautiful picture of you, and you are looking at a camera wondering why this person is taking your picture because you don't like to have your picture taken. And there's art in the image.
Indeed.
And thinking this together, that the person who took the picture is an artist and took a very beautiful picture of you with art in the picture reminds us that we can't explain everything yet, nor will we ever be able to, because humans will never catch up with ourselves. So we need art that, as Amiri Baraka put it, expresses what cannot be explained. So this is a second thing. It's not, for some people, they imagine that when we who have been organizing for many years or who write theoretical treatises, as I also do, talk about art, they imagine we're talking about illustrating the argument. That's illustration is illustration, and it's a gorgeous thing. Art is different. Art is different. It has its own modality, its own modalities, its own way of bringing consciousness to the surface, which brings me to my third and final point, which is that the biggest lesson for my entire life, and I'm 70 years old, pushing 70 and a half, is that experience and consciousness are not an identity. Which means identity is not in and of itself consciousness. We, for example, in many, many places around the United States and further and beyond, have had many very intensive, conflictual encounters between those who say, I had experience of X, and therefore, because of my experience, I am expert, and therefore, if I am for what you are against, my experience trumps your politics, right? So one example is that while there are many people who have spent time locked up in prison or have spent time under house arrest or gang injunctions or other kinds of control, will say, oh, there must be a good jail that they could design and build, and I will support it. You, Ruthie, didn't experience what I experienced, and therefore you have no right to say there isn't a good jail. I have every obligation to say there isn't a good jail, and then to make arguments and to show the experiences of people whose experiences have led them to a different consciousness about the possibilities of jail, about the need for social goods, the need for social welfare, the need for us to have fulfilling ways to live and work and be together, whether we want to be together collectively, whether we're hermits and loners and would rather be left alone. Nobody's being compelled to live in a commune. We're just saying, let's bring our communal wealth together so that we can do things like make the Graduate Center terrific and make sure that people stop dying of preventable causes, whether it's COVID or a gunshot or falling off a bridge or falling down the stairs.
Thank you for that. I'm wondering if you can say something about, I think I have said in the past that we're doing abolition all day and every day, all the time in different ways. I wonder if you subscribe to that view, if you kind of are concerned sometimes that this risks devolving politics to simply kind of individual level actions. That's not something that I know you don't worry about that because you're always working on the multiple levels of, whether it's kind of the individual, the community level, the societal level, the state level work, and you're always looking at the structures and individual stuff. But as abolition becomes more popular in the sense of more people paying attention, thinking about it, picking particular strands or particular ideas and kind of running with only those ideas and not having read widely or experienced widely, are you concerned about a couple of things around that concept of, the doing of abolition on a daily basis turning into like some weird self-help stuff? Number one. And number two, whether you have been considering and thinking about, I am somebody who is always, like, from before I had language for abolition, talked a lot about imagination and the need for us to imagine something different, another way. And I don't want it to get lost that while I'm like down with the imagination and I believe in it deeply, that it's in the doing of things that we're going to get free, and also that these systems that we're talking about we don't just have to build new things. We absolutely do. I feel very strongly about the building of new things, but we also have to tear down. Like, these things all have to happen together. And I guess I'm just throwing out to you your thoughts, kind of your theory of abolition as the doing of things on a daily basis. And if you can speak to that a bit.
That's a great question, Mariame, and it sort of makes me want to loop back through an answer I gave you earlier about organizing with organized people, to make more explicit what I mean. So yes, of course, being an abolitionist is something that one does every day, but it's not a matter of if each person individually in isolation started doing something called abolition, somehow miraculously we would aggregate into an abolitionist world. That's the mystification of neoclassical economics turned inside out, and it'll never work. I don't think. So what then is becoming rather than being an abolitionist, because it's a constant becoming.
That's right.
Indeed, subjectivity, if I may, is historical becoming, and that's what this is. That we bring our energy and our intelligence and our analysis and our tools and our experience to the project of changing the world. But we do it knowing that changing the world, or to use the phrase that you just used, Mariame, tearing some things down, is not the same as erasing one day and then coming back the next day or in 7 years after the earth has been salted and not fertile, and then start planting again. Rather, things can be torn down by being reconfigured for something else. If we use the pieces of what things are made of, we can make something else. Now, I feel people in the audience going, oh, no, no, Audre Lorde said the master's tools, the master's tools. Well, in my opinion, and I've published this, so this is my written opinion that I stand by, the most important thing in print when you read the master's tools is the apostrophe between the R and S on masters. The tools that belong to the master. To me, what we're talking about here in big ways as well as small is a question of ownership and effective control, and different ways of understanding what ownership and effective control should be. Therefore, I mean, let's take something that people like to sneer at, you know, social theory. People love to sneer at it, even though the fact is everybody theorizes every day. You get out of bed, you're doing some little theoretical work to plan how you want your day to go.
Exactly.
And then you act on the theory, and then you do something else, and you do something else. And all that some more elaborate theories are, whether it's a theory of how to turn the capitalist-induced climate change into the possibility of green economic activity, or that is not capitalist, or the atomization, which is, say, the dispersal of so many of us into small mutual aid organizations because it's necessary right now, but how to build an infrastructure, and part of this has to do with the consciousness and awareness of each other, to bring people together to do, as it were, big things. All of this is important, and it brings us back to what I was talking about at the beginning of our conversation, and that is that there is an international dimension to the struggle over what lies perhaps at the core of the contemporary abolition movement, but is not its entire extent. And at the core of the contemporary abolition movement is the combination of organized violence and organized abandonment that has produced so much vulnerability that we see in every single country where inequality is growing and is deepest. Mass incarceration is the most prevalent. And this is not just United States, it's also South Africa, it's also Brazil, it's also Russia, not the Soviet Union, Russia, the Russian Federation. Those are places where mass incarceration rose dramatically over the last 30 years or so. Dramatically. And I mean in the Russian Federation since the end of the Soviet Union, since the breakup of the Soviet Union. So all of these then, these conditions and these concerns and these observations leave me with a few, well, because we're going to have to conclude.
Yes, I'm gonna stop you for a second because I want to go towards our conclusion.
Yeah.
And John, can you put the slides back on, which I think you might be leading into this because this is something I wanted to ask you about. Next slide, please. And this goes back to the Gilmore girls because we full circle.
Okay.
And you have said obviously that abolition has to be green. Right. It has to take seriously the problem of environmental harm, environmental racism, and environmental degradation. Next slide. To be green, it has to be red. It has to figure out ways to generalize the resources needed for well-being for the most vulnerable people in our community, which then will extend to all people. And then, next slide. And to do that, to be green and red, it has to be international. It has to stretch across borders so that we can consolidate our strength, our experience, and our vision for a better world. John, you can end the slides. and go back. Thank you so much. And yes, we have 10 minutes, and I want to give you those 10 minutes to expand on your ideas around, again, abolition needing to be green, red, and international, and kind of why abolition has to be thought globally in order for it to have any, to make any sense in our current moment. And then also thinking through the opportunities to intentionally organize around climate change, which is a mass important issue of survival and curtailing premature death, as you would put it. So talk about those things. And the last thing I would love to hear as you talk about this is, can you offer to the folks who are listening right now who are very new to abolition? I've used the term abolition throughout. When I'm talking about abolition, I'm often rooted within PIC abolition, rooted within transformative justice. But there are multiple types of people oriented towards abolition, depending on what politics they're coming from. That I think people think of abolition as one thing when it's not, and also think of the abolitionist politic as one thing. Whereas there are many abolitionists who would identify as anarchists. There are many abolitionists who identify as communists. There are many abolitionists who identify as socialists. I don't think you can be an abolitionist and identify as pro-capitalist. I don't think that's actually possible within, but who knows? Can you be a liberal and an abolitionist? Maybe. I don't think that's possible, in my opinion, but okay. So I would love you to talk about your vision of, again, abolition as green, red, and international, and leave us with some thoughts for new people to this idea about where kind of abolition not being one thing. Yeah.
Well, great, challenging final question. And thanks for making those slides, because I was trying to remember all the words I used, and that was so great to just read them on the screen. The central struggle that so many people are engaged with around the world, again, whether their lives are immediately precarious or not, almost makes no difference, is a struggle to make lives, And one of the ways I've described the kind of making that people do is to call what they've made abolition geographies. So abolition geographies are the antagonistic contradiction to carceral geography, and carceral geography lies, again, at the heart of the relationship between organized violence and organized abandonment. So some examples of how the various strands of people who organize themselves in order to make the world better, you named anarchists and communists and socialists among them, how they come together is through the how they identify a struggle, whether it's a struggle over farm workers in Brazil or in California or in somewhere in the great central regions of Africa, who are exposed to or made vulnerable to certain kinds of inputs, let us call them pesticides or diesel fuel or arsenic, that brings their lives closer to the end, brings the lives of their communities and loved ones, including people who don't work in the fields, closer to an end. And that becomes the struggle and the face of it over things like wages and conditions of work, But actually underneath it is the struggle over how we make what we need to complete the cycles of social reproduction. And by social reproduction, as my colleague at the GC, Cindy Katz, and others have shown us with their amazing research over the years, it's everything about life. It's not only the going to work or running the household, it's everything about life. So it has to do with culture. It has to do with certain kinds of abilities to move or to stay put, both of those things. So the kinds of indications that I get from the work that people do around the world in making abolition geographies show me that certain kinds of, for example, stewardship of the land and water in some parts of Bolivia are producing an abolition geography, even as those people are struggling against a certain kind of entrenched landowner class that is fighting against the care of land and care of water. Or somewhere else, completely different situation in South Africa today, and I mean today, throughout Cape Town and elsewhere, people have been struggling to be able to live on land, to occupy land, which is also something that the MST has been fighting for in Brazil, and people have been fighting for in many different parts of the world. And the occupations in the sort of outer edges of settlements and townships in Greater Cape Town have brought as a response to them many, many, many layers of policing and organized violence. And just recently, a combination of more anarchist organizers and more communist organizers in consultation with the communities for the first time insisted that part of how they assert their right to occupy and live on and flourish in that land requires the abolition of police. And abolition has not been a word that has had a lot of favorable acceptance for many communities that I have been in close dialogue with, for example, in South Africa, because certain sorts of vulnerabilities that are the result of so much organized abandonment that has been the burden that people have borne over many years has made people so vulnerable that it seemed to many people, as has also been the case in the US and elsewhere, that the answer to that vulnerability is police rather than the answer is abolition. So we see abolition geographies growing up in urban and rural and in between places.
Thank you so much. Ruthie, do you want to, we have 5 extra minutes apparently because we started late now. Do you want to talk about abolition not being one thing as the close?
Sure. Abolition's not one thing. We have to change everything. We have to change everything. That's why my book is called Change Everything. Yeah. And again, that's changing things means many, many different kinds of things depending on the situation, relations, and so forth that people have and what it is they think they can do. So it's back to that apostrophe in master's tools. It's changing that apostrophe, taking that out and turning the tools, indeed taking that apostrophe out and then saying, well, wait a minute, maybe master should go too. And we do an edit and then use the tools. Mm-hmm. Changing everything means having a different relationship, which many of us have developed over the last 20 years, to our understanding of people who are already organized, what their anxieties are and what the possibilities are to organize together. And I'll give you an example from a faith community. A few years ago, I was surprised and honored to be invited to the 200th gathering of Freedom's Prophets at the Mother Bethel AME Church in Philadelphia. So that church was founded by Richard Allen and a few other free Black men at the end of the 18th century. For those of you who don't remember how the centuries go, that would be 1790. Like before Britain had an Office for War and Colonialism, Black people in the United States had the AME Church. And that church started out as a kind of spread out, atomized faith community that established its various congregations wherever the preachers went and proselytized. And in 1816, I think it was, the bishops, the people who headed the various congregations, decided that they should gather themselves together. They call themselves Freedom's Prophets. That's P-R-O-P-H-E-T-S, Freedom's Prophets, and establish the church as one larger organization. Well, 200 years after that gathering, I was invited, along with a number of other people, to come and talk about the pressing issues that people in faith communities and people whose lives are touched by faith communities experience in the United States, because many of the people in that church whose dynamics had changed over time, that was not completely male dominated by bishops. Many of the bishops are women. They are not all heterosexual, and so on and so forth. They came together to say, in the wake of Ferguson, do we even matter? We, the bishops of the AME Church, could not roll up into Ferguson, into the streets, and have anybody gather at our feet and say, what should we do? The leadership was elsewhere. It was the young people. It was Black Lives Matter, younger people. And this gathering happened so that people could debate and dispute and come up with a fresh understanding of what Freedom's Prophets should be doing. And by that, I don't mean that a bunch of old people asked a bunch of young people to come and give us some like hip language that we would then go repeat, you know, from the pulpit next week, while the young people went back to the streets and continued to fight the war for Black freedom. Rather, the question was, what can this institution do, wherever its congregations are, in order to provide sustenance, encouragement, a site to meet, ways of understanding, the use of the Bible for all of the different things that people have used the Bible and the Quran and other books of faith to do in order to achieve collective freedom. So it was a very moving time. It was very difficult. There were people who didn't want anything to do with it, but they used their time on the microphone to say why. And that also was, for me, given that it was the 200th anniversary of Freedom's Prophets, another example of people making abolition geography. I see it here in various places I have lived, with people making kind of ad hoc universities to teach one another things. I see it looking back through time in what freed people in the US South did to build communities that were not merely enjoying the absence of slavery, but were building the presence of life, because abolition is presence. If there's one thing it is, it's presence.
Thank you so, so much, Ruthie. I want to thank everybody who joined us today and took time out of your evening to listen to us chop it up. Appreciate that always. I'm so, so grateful to Ruthie for everything that she's done to do so much for changing my life personally, but also all lives of so many other people who we love you, and we are just excited anytime you want to talk with us. So keep talking with us. And if you want to say bye, say bye.
I do want to say bye, and I just want to shout out to some of my friends around the world who tuned in, including my sisters from Sisters Inside in Australia. Shout out to you, and my sister Kelly Hayes in Chicago, and my sister Kelly Gillespie in South Africa, and Vanessa Thompson in Switzerland, and people all around the world. Shout out to you. And I also want to send out love and support to my dear friend Vijay Prashad, whose mother has passed on and joined the ancestors. May her memory be a blessing.
Thanks, Ruthie. Bye, everybody.